the Joint Assembly of European Union Interpreters representing the collective voted unanimously to stop remote interpreting.
Their goal was to develop high-quality machine translation capabilities for these low-resource languages.
And welcome everyone, and welcome back to the Pod of Slater. Hi there, Anna.
Hi, Florian.
We need to catch up on nearly a month of news, Anna.
Yeah, it's been a while and a lot has been happening.
A lot has been happening. I think the last one we did on June 17th, so episode 122. Sorry for that. Busy times. You know, we had SlaterCon remote, great conference, etc. So we're trying to get you over the summer with some news. So today we're going to talk a bit about the kind of RSI, remote simultaneous interpreting pushback that's been happening at, two rather large organizations. And then we're going to talk about another large organization called Meta, the former Facebook, and what they're doing in machine translation. Going to speak a little bit about subtitling and dubbing, and just this really strong growth that this is part of the industry is experiencing, talking about Disney and robo-voices, and then closing in on just very briefly talking about Zoom. So RSI, huh, Anna? Getting a lot of opposition.
Yeah, it's causing a lot of discussion.
A lot of discussion and earache and headache and all kinds of other aches. So kind of started out with a publication, like an article in a UN publication called UN Today. And we read that. It's probably about a month ago. And a couple of interpreters there kind of pushed back really hard, saying that mainly just the sound quality is not good. It's causing issues with, just unreliable audio, kind of audio levels, right? So, you may even get kind of hearing damage and things like that. So they pushed back on that. And then the UN actually decided to reduce the number of weekly meetings interpreters had to service from 7 to 5 and cutting meeting length from 3 to 2 hours. So they did obtain a result. We didn't really follow that particular thread of the story further. Spoke about that article that was written. And then about 3 or 4 days later, there was this tweet and there was this whole discussion starting on Twitter around an interpreter strike at the European Parliament, kind of back at the end of June. And on June 23rd, 2022, the Joint Assembly of European Union Interpreters representing the collective voted unanimously to stop remote interpreting. That's as big as it gets.
Yeah, quite an action.
Quite the action there. So they were seeking kind of improved work after their negotiations seeking improved work condition failed. Kind of they adopted that resolution to go on strike. And I'm quoting it from the article. The group asked interpreters to read out the following: a message whenever a remote interpreter is scheduled to intervene or takes the floor for at least 2 weeks. And the message is: the interpreters are on strike. They will not interpret remote interventions due to potentially harmful effect of non-compliant sound on health and the lack of adapted working conditions. They did make exception for Ukrainian speakers in the light of the current situation in that country. And so there was a tweet. There were even members of the European Parliament showing solidarity with them, with their what they call industrial action. And so there was a video posted of a couple of gentlemen, taking sides with the interpreter and saying that it's their right to do that. So I think generally the problem really centers around the quality of the audio. When people dial in from all kinds of locations with all kinds of backgrounds and all kinds of levels of loudness, or it's just hard to control that. So that was one threat that really pushed back. And then there's also in the European Parliament, that was not at the European Union, but the European Parliament was a problem with the use of non-accredited interpreters. I don't want to go into that. I don't think we researched it well enough to comment on that. But the audio issue really seems to be a big issue. I also spoke briefly to Jan Rausch last time about RSI, and he does say that there may be issues, but he also qualified that, of course, that there's a lot of positives coming out of RSI as well. So I don't know. What are your thoughts on that, generally?
Well, the interpreters have a fairly clear message, I think. One, they want to be able to do their job well, and two, they need to be able to do it in conditions that are not going to damage their hearing. So the poor quality of the sound, I think it's particularly with speakers who are calling in, as you said, has an impact on both of those factors. And I think one of the points that they raised was that the sound quality is not in line with ISO requirements, so that gives a kind of benchmark for them to measure against. And I know that during COVID, there were some concessions or some adaptations around the length of meetings due to those the poorer sound quality. But now that meetings are more frequent, they're kind of going back to the original lengths, and so this is having an impact. And I can't remember what the percentage was, but a certain percentage of a high percentage of interpreters reporting problems with their hearing. So yeah, it's a conversation that it's an important conversation that they need to have with the European Parliament.
100%. It seems on the surface of it, without like digging deep and doing any research, seems like something that should be solvable, right? I mean, you just have some kind of limiter that, obviously doesn't let any kind of crazy noises through, maybe certain frequencies, level it out. I mean, for our podcast here, we're recording it on just a podcast recording platform, and then we edit it in a tool called Descript, and then there's just like one button, like it's called Studio Quality, that like magically transforms it into what I hope is great audio. So I wonder why there should be some tech that kind of levels this out. Yeah, we'll follow up on that, see where the strike's going, and definitely do a follow-up piece in the next couple of weeks. Now, one company that really got a messaging figured out to the public is Meta. Mark Zuckerberg personally taking to his Facebook and posting about what he called a breakthrough. And we, of course, whenever we hear breakthrough in the context of machine translation, we put it in quotation marks. So tell us more about that. What's happening? What's the breakthrough? Is it a breakthrough, or is it at least something noteworthy?
I think it's definitely a very important milestone, or it seems to be. So Meta AI has released this new AI model, which they call NLLB 200. And NLLB, which is really hard to say, stands for No Language Left Behind. So they're homing in on these low resource languages and seeing what they can do to get high performing machine translation in these languages. And of course, it's always been a big challenge. There's very little data, which means that it's hard to train the machine translation models to perform well. So in terms of whether or not it's a breakthrough, what they're saying is that their goal was to develop high quality machine translation capabilities for these low resource languages. And they're saying that they succeeded in this goal to some extent, at least. So they reported a 44% improvement in blur scores. And quoting the authors of the paper, they said that this lays important groundwork towards realizing a universal translation system. So they've open sourced the model. It's 50 billion parameters, so it's a lot smaller than those large language models, those kind of like Swiss Army knife language models that do everything. It's more of a very targeted, specialized model, 50 billion parameters, just focused on these 200 languages. And yeah, it does look like a milestone, because of course it's been very difficult for speakers of these languages to access online content in their native or preferred languages. So if there is a machine translation model capable of doing this, then it really opens up the possibility of getting a lot of that online content into those languages, which particularly for Africa and Asian languages.
Don't you think they're like the end goal? Because we also covered a lot of their speech like quote unquote speech translation efforts, etc. Don't you think the end goal here is to like you and I meeting in the metaverse and being able to like speak, and it doesn't matter what language we speak, and it just interprets live?
Yeah, I think this seems to be Zuckerberg's goal. He mentioned several times that when they talked about this model, they said it will provide capabilities, current capabilities, but they're also looking forward to the future. So the future for them being the metaverse, and they have this vision of everyone being able to meet and to communicate in either speech or text, and to communicate in any language using, well, depending on these multilingual models.
It gets so philosophical and cultural, and I mean, yes, translation, like the translation of the content or the words is one part, but then I mean, there's so many layers to this that would make this vision very, very hard to achieve. And so the whole thing is open source, right?
Yeah, the whole thing is open source. So it's available on GitHub, and they've made everything available. So you can download the dataset, you can download the encoder, you can download the final model itself. You can also download the benchmark that they used for quality evaluation. So they created a new benchmark, which they call Flores 200. And to create that, they actually worked with professional translators and what they call quality assurance agencies, which are probably language service providers, to create translations in those languages, which then served as the benchmark to evaluate the output of the model quality. So all of that is available for use and adoption by the research community. And they've kind of put out a call for people to find applications for the model. So they're providing up to $200,000 worth of grants to nonprofit organizations for real-world applications of the NLLB 200 model.
That's a bit of an incentive right there. Cool. Well, let's see where this goes. I mean, we did cover so many of these breakthroughs, and it feels like there's always a bit of a disconnect between kind of the B2B, content side, B2B, kind of LSP servicing big enterprise, and then this whole research world and all these open source things of specific models here. This one's very big, and of course it got a lot of press. I think, I don't know, a couple of hundred articles been written about it, I'm sure. Anyway, we picked it up, and it seems like a biggish piece of news. So on the media localization side, things are going really well. I know there's this line of thought that I keep hearing from certain parts of the industry that it's not as rosy as portrayed. It's, certain subtitlers are struggling, etc. I mean, this is anecdotal. What we can follow here with Slator is just the hard facts, which are financial results, right? And so when I'm looking at these financial results, I'm seeing just a very strongly growing industry. We just covered Zoo Digital like we regularly do because they're publicly listed. They can disclose all this. So they basically grew their full year revenue by 78%. I mean, nearly doubling to $70 million, and their EBITDA, the earnings, grew by 84% to $8 million. Margin widens, etc. They're saying they won a few nice contracts with big streamers. So, and then generally they're saying that they're seeing more growth because there's work related to ongoing territory launches of major streaming platforms, right? We spoke about it many times on the pod. Sure, Netflix is having major challenges in growing its business, but those major challenges often result from all these other guys getting into the space, which all need media localization services. So yeah, for the industry at large, it's great. The CEO, Zoo Digital CEO, said that as well as processing of a significant volume of new original titles that have been completed and adapted into an increasing number of languages for global distribution. So just generally very, very good news, which of course also means more competition, and they're getting more competition among other players. Keyword Studios, the game localization company, is now talking a lot more openly about entering MediaLock. We covered this like a couple of years ago, that there's some plans, and they didn't hide it, but they never really added a lot of color to it. But now the CFO, John Haug, shared some of the plans, how they want to expand into these adjacent markets, including going much more heavily into the film and TV space. And he said that it feels like a very natural adjacency to us. He also said that dubbing and subtitling for media is, quote unquote, essentially the same as for games. And, that he said that they've been quietly building out their dubbing and subtitling capability over the past few years. And now they are at, I think, something like 16 million euro in subbing and dubbing revenues for in 2021. So sizable business. I mean, that, 16 million euros, it's quite a good figure.
Yeah, it's a quite sizable to grow kind of in the background, but it looks like they're really starting to turn their attention more strongly to that as an adjacent service.
100%. And I mean, they know how to handle very complex production workflows from the gaming side, right? So having assets, having studios, having, kind of the whole, of course, kind of multimedia setup is nothing new to them. So it feels like this is, they're going to be a very strong competitor. Also, they're going to buy companies. That's what they're saying. They're saying, we're looking at some of the acquisition opportunities to build out that footprint further so we can create a one-stop shop for localization in TV and film space. And I mean, and they have the capital to buy, one or two or three of the big players out there. Not the top two, but definitely a couple of the big ones. So, stay tuned for definitely more subtitling and dubbing news from Keywords Studios. And we did cover the Zoom launching finally that translation feature that they had been promising for a while. We haven't tested it yet because it's only for business users, right?
Yeah. So it's real-time translation and multilingual captions for business users only.
For business users only. I'm so tempted to upgrade our account and just start playing around with it. I think it's 10 languages now: simplified Chinese, Dutch, English, French, German, Italian, Japanese, Korean, Russian, Spanish, and Ukrainian. There you go. I mean, the multilingual captioning is not revolutionary, but anything that even remotely would work in terms of real-time translation would be, it would be big news, and we should probably test it out. The article we wrote, it got 1,000 likes on LinkedIn because I think all the Zoom people liked it. So thanks for that. It was a big launch. Let's stay with film and media. Sorry for this kind of brief interruption there with Zoom, but you covered Disney experimenting with synthesized voices because maybe the talent crunch, there's so much demand. So what's Disney doing in synthetic voice?
Yeah, so it looks like Disney's kind of experimenting with obviously not replacing human dubbing, but kind of augmenting human dubbing with these synthesized voice capabilities. And they're doing this in a couple of different areas. So we covered this in a story, I think a couple of weeks ago. So Disney partnered with a voice cloning startup called Respeecher. This was back in 2020. And they did this to feature a synthetic voice for a character in the Star Wars miniseries, The Mandalorian. They wanted to create a synthetic voice for the younger version of the character Luke Skywalker. So they worked with this company for that purpose. And then again, this year, they've partnered with the same startup to use voice synthesis technology for the miniseries Obi-Wan Kenobi to enhance the voiceover for the character of Darth Vader. It's unclear how much of that dialogue was synthesized. It may have just been used, the technology may have just been used to enhance the voiceovers which were provided by 91-year-old actor James Earl Jones. So it looks like, they're experimenting with how voice synthesis can be used in these kind of creative situations where they may need to modify the existing voice or create a younger version of the same voice. And their competitor Paramount has done a similar thing. They've partnered with London-based tech startup called Sonantic to solve a similar challenge posed by this year's film Top Gun. So in this case, actor Val Kilmer, his voice has unfortunately suffered some damage due to throat cancer. So the idea was to reprise his original role in the sequel using a voice that Sonantic had generated for him. So it looks like for the moment Disney's mainly been outsourcing these synthesized voice services, but there are some signs that they're looking to bring more expertise in-house. They had an open role in May of this year for a VP of localization, and the responsibilities for that role include creating processes for new systems and technology, including the use of synthesized voices, as well as, of course, AI and machine translation.
Wow. Yeah. I need to go back to The Mandalorian and Obi-Wan Kenobi. I don't even know where to start. it suggests it to me when I open Disney Plus, but I don't know which I should watch first, like where it is in the kind of timeline. And yeah,
It's getting complicated with all the spin-offs.
it's getting complicated, right? Like, is it earlier? Is it after? Like, where are we in the empire, and or not, or the republic? So yeah. Plus, it's probably still a little early to watch it with my kids. So maybe I'll give it another couple of years. All right, lots of news, and we'll try to give you another news segment in a couple of weeks as we're heading into the summer and people are taking their well-deserved breaks, at least here in the beautiful continent of Europe. All right, catch you soon.